This Easter is like, well, none other we've ever known. We're scattered and isolated. Living in the midst of a pandemic is a pretty scary time. Many of us are struggling with anxiety and fear, grief, even anger and frustration. We wonder what the future holds. On that first Easter morning, hearts leapt with fear at first, massive grief. They'd just gone through the worst experience of their lives. And at daybreak, the women had gone to the grave to do those small things that humans do to care for a beloved one who has died. The men came running at that shattering news. He's gone. Many years ago, Dave and I hosted a pilgrim group to Israel. When we were in Jerusalem, we gathered at the place called the Garden Tomb. There we took turns, bending down and stepping into a doorway built into a cave, where we entered a burial place that many believe is Jesus' grave. Face to face with a grave, my mind reeled, and I had to try to take it in. A real man, a real death. It just took my breath away. Later, as we were being ushered out of the garden, I turned back around and I looked at a door that was closed now, just a simple wooden door, and on it a handmade wooden sign that read, "He is not here. He is risen." It seemed so ordinary, an ordinary door, a handmade sign. I really didn't know what to make of it. I knew if I was looking for something, that wasn't it. And yet, all of a sudden, maybe because it was so simple, a garden and a hillside with a cave in it, and it just became real to me in a way that I could never otherwise have understood. In the midst of ordinary life, extraordinary things happen, and they happen all the time. Good things and bad things, celebrations and earthquakes, and yes, even pandemics. None of these things are outside of our experience. But for some reason, when we tell the story of Good Friday and Easter, it seems to be outside of our experience, as if we don't know what the darkness of grief is like, or how hope can feel when it reappears on the horizon. We're told that one of those on that morning, one who knew love and was loved, was now grieving and lost. And he bent down and looked inside the tomb and saw the grave clothes lying there, and he believed. Not long after this, Jesus walked with the disciples on the Emmaus Road, and then again he was down at the Galilee, at the lake. While we were in Israel, I remember going down to the lake and sitting on a rocky beach and remembering this story. And I watched, and there was this wind squall that blew by. And I watched a heron and an egret both out fishing. And I felt the raindrops as the clouds swept past. Jesus lived in a pretty beautiful place. It's a lot like the Okanagan. His ministry focused on the lake and the people who live nearby. And it's there that the disciples fled, home to the Galilee, following all that had happened in Jerusalem. They remembered all that they had been taught, and they came face to face with the risen Christ. Whatever you think of that gospel of Easter, take into account what happened to a frightened group of people after this, fleeing for their lives, grieving, trying to pick up the pieces of their lives after one would think all their hope was gone. But the story didn't end there. From the Galilee, these men and women went out into the world transformed, and from their faith and from their teaching, from their ministry, the Christian church was born. Today we are living through this moment of human history, and some are calling this the Great Pause. Here, in this time of pandemic, it seems the whole world has stepped out of the rut that we've been in this last century. And they say even the earth itself has gotten quieter down in the crusts of the soil. We are, as the Nobel Prize winner Julia Esquivel said, threatened with resurrection. Julia wrote from Guatemala, and she described what it is to have hope and faith living in the face of death squads. We tend to think of death as the ultimate threat. Julia told of the threat of resurrection. Resurrection comes as a consequence of choosing a new life, choosing to resist the forces of death, choosing a different way to see the world. New life comes from change, changes that are challenging, difficult, changes that require courage and hard work. Choosing resurrection is to believe that there's nothing on heaven or earth that can separate us from God's love, nothing so terrible that it can't be redeemed. But resurrection isn't an easy thing to go through. Sometimes we choose death in life. We stay in an unhealthy relationship. We allow cynicism to shut us down. We are involved in compulsive overactivity or substance abuse. We choose to stay where we are in life because we're afraid of what might come our way if we embrace resurrection in life. Great religious traditions are rooted in mysteries that you don't have to pretend to understand, including claims about what will happen after we die. But this I do know. Choosing resurrection, it's always worth the risk. On Easter morning, we are witnesses to resurrection. Winter can't hold back spring. In the moment of human history in which we live, God is making all things new, even each one of us. Christ is risen indeed. Thanks be to God. Amen.